So we have on the left, we have Norman. He has over 25 years of CEO and senior sales management experience. He's worked with clients in a wide range of industries, including financial services, healthcare, technology, manufacturing, and distribution. Before SRG, Norman served as president and CEO of Catapult Inc., a leading provider of personal computer training services, where he oversaw operations and managed growth before the company's acquisition by IBM. And Irina is the head of enablement at Seismic, the industry's leading sales enablement solution and storytelling platform. She has 12 plus years of building global enablement functions for professional service companies and SaaS startups. As a leader, Irina has pioneered new enablement, learning, and operational initiatives worldwide, built positive employment cultures, and coached top performers. Before Seismic, Irina built and led the global enablement and training team at Percolate, supporting the company's GTM function. Okay, Norman and Irina, take us from here.
Great. Well, Irina, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to co-host this webinar with Seismic. We're really excited about the topic that we have for today. And let me just start by sharing the agenda. So our agenda for today is really talk about the current state and some of the challenges of sales enablement. And there's a lot of additional challenges as we kind of work our way through COVID-19 and prepare for a reopening. The importance of sales enablement as we emerge from the crisis. So a lot of companies are starting to put together plans. Different states are having reopening plans, different geographies across the world. As Alonso mentioned, we have a global audience. Irina has a lot of experience with worldwide initiatives. Talking about a buyer-centric sales enablement approach, what we mean by buyer-centric and how that relates to how we sell and the messaging that we use. How we have the right conversations, and the conversation has really shifted as we think about going through a global pandemic and what's important to people, what people are going through personally and professionally. So those conversations, including priorities, have changed some. And then how do we leverage our sales managers? We're going to be really successful with our enablement initiatives, and how we engage the sales managers are really the quarterbacks for that, and they're on the front lines with our sales teams really making that happen. So really excited. I want to get started with our first item, some of the current sales state and challenges of sales enablement. I'll just share a few. Some of these are obvious, some of these are a little less obvious, and I'm sure that you have more. If you do have some more, feel free to put them into the chat pod. But first of all, our lives have been disrupted. As you can see, I'm working from a home office. I think Irina's doing the same. I think Alonso's doing the same. So our lives aren't the same. Some of us have elderly parents who may have some challenges. Others of us have children who are in school, but they're doing their work from home. I, as an example, have adult children, and I have 2 of them living here right now with me. Sales teams are working remotely, so most of our sales teams are distributed. Many sales opportunities are stalled. I mean, we hear things like no budgets, there's not necessarily clear next steps, we have other priorities. The forecasting has become really challenging, if not impossible, based on just not having clear visibility on opportunities. Every single opportunity needs to be requalified. I can almost assure you that every opportunity has had some changes associated with it. And the way we engage with our sales team is really critical. So those are some of the things that we've seen. And I'm just curious, I'm going to open a poll, and maybe Alonso, you can help us with this, but just to kind of gauge, and we have a very large group with us today, so it'd be really interesting to just learn, how has the COVID-19 crisis impacted your revenue? And Irina, I'm just curious, you're working with so many different clients, you guys have your own teams at Seismic. What are you seeing, and what do you think the impact on revenues has been short term, and what do you think is going to happen longer term?
Yeah, that's a good question. And thanks for having me to give my perspective here today on this really great webinar. So I think everybody has been affected in some shape or form, be it in revenue, with deals being stalled and deals being slowed down. And depending on what industry you work in, some of us have been more affected than others. So I wouldn't be surprised to see in this poll really a range from A to E, all the way, seeing we have people from all over the world and people from different industries here today.
So I'm starting to watch some of the real-time polling, and Alonso, looks like we have quite a few responses. So when you're ready, why don't you put this up on the screen? But we've been getting, like Irina, I think we see a variety of responses, and it looks like we're now sharing the results. But you can see that, what is it, roughly 7% have revenues up, and that's not a surprise. There are some industries that are doing well, so congratulations. 25% have revenues that are steady. So if we add those two together, we have 32% where revenues are flat or up. But that must mean, if my math is correct, that we have 68% where revenues are down. And if we think about down over 25%, we have over 40% of our attendees where revenues are down 25% or more, with 15% having them over 50%. So that that pain is real, and it's having an effect. How long that will last, I don't know. We are starting to see things reopen. We are starting to see new opportunities. It really depends on the industry. Irina, any other thoughts before we kind of jump into the content for today? Just your perspective.
Yeah, I just think the things that we're going to be talking about, if you are in the A to B section or in the C to E section, I think this is going to be relevant for everybody who is with us today, in regards to consistently driving the efforts and putting the best foot forward for your organization. So I think even if we're in A or B, just the unpredictability of what's to come in the next few quarters, I think that affects us all. So hopefully some good tips and tricks and tactics today that we can all use to impact this.
So thank you. I think that's true. I think we will have something that's relevant for everyone, irrespective. This was really just a way to gauge the kind of what's going on with the participants. And I do want to thank everyone for participating. As Alonso said earlier, we're looking to keep this as interactive as possible, and we'll have other opportunities for you to share and contribute throughout the session. So I want to start with just a definition here, and the definition of sales enablement. This is from the Sales Enablement Society. And it reads, sales enablement ensures buyers are engaged at the right time and place and with the right assets by a well-trained client-facing staff to provide a world-class experience along the customer's journey. So that's part of the definition. And then it goes on, says it optimizes the selling motion in order to increase pipeline, move opportunities forward, win bigger deals, and drive profitable growth. And there was two things that really stood out to me, which is particularly given that we have Irina from Seismic here. The first one is having, the right time, right place, right assets. I mean, that's something that you guys focus on a lot from an enablement standpoint, and maybe how that impacts overall pipeline and win rates. So we'd love to get your perspective on, our clients having the right conversations at the right time, at the right place.
Yeah, so I think Sales Enablement Society, most of you might be familiar with this organization, and I think they've done a really great job just giving a general definition of what sales enablement is. There's many others out there, but I think the essence always comes down to the same components, like just the ones that you've just mentioned, Norman. The piece that for me always plays into this is definition is one thing, and we can work off something general for all of us, for all the enablement practitioners that are on the call. The piece that really closely is connected to that is, what are our responsibilities? Like, how are we making sure this happens? And I've seen it very often throughout my career that this matters depending on which organization you're sitting in. So again, having a strong definition is important, but then also for your own individual efforts, make sure that you then take this and break this down into different buckets of responsibility for what you're really owning within your company and what you're responsible for. That's going to help with a lot of the things we're going to be talking about today.
So I really appreciate that input, because I think it is one thing to have a definition. I think this is really good foundational, but the question is, what do we do with this? And then how does it really impact, particularly the challenges? And I know there was 3 challenges in particular that you mentioned that sales enablement is facing right now. And I'd love you to just kind of share with us a little bit about those challenges.
Yes, and a lot that you're going to hear from me today, those are things that me and my team we're currently running into, right? So it's something that I'm dealing with on a daily basis, so hopefully that's going to be helpful. So the 3 key ones, number 1 is connection. Like, some reps have already worked from home before the pandemic started, but a lot of them have not. That includes myself. And some are stuck in situations that are not ideal. I'm thinking about people sitting in a small New York City apartment, or people that just can't leave the house, like not being able to go to an office. That's a pretty big deal right now for a lot of us. And then the lack of connections is also impacting just motivation and team spirit. Like I've seen it quite a bit now. We really have to find ways to just keep, the sellers pumped and excited and driven, while at the same time we'll also have to make sure we're driving a sensitivity towards our prospect and customer's situation, because they're all in the same situation that we're in right now. And then the last one is social interaction. So here comes another happy hour. We've all been there. We get to 5:30 in the day and I'm like, do I really want to do this right now? I really want to see those guys, but maybe it's a little much. So the whole point is, what are other things that we can come up with here in regards to driving that interaction? On the going virtual front, that's a big topic for me right now. I was just in the middle with my team to roll out a global classroom training. I had global flights booked to be in all the locations to help facilitate, and comes COVID. So we had to turn the whole thing around. We had to make sure we cut the content. We built something really, really interactive. And output was, this was probably the best feedback I've ever gotten for any training I've ever rolled out in my career. So almost a little bit of a shocker how that really turned out. But again, I think there's a lot of win-win here when you do that. A couple of things to consider is obviously the Zoom fatigue. So if somebody comes on your training, has been already 7 hours on Zoom, how much are you going to get out of them? How are you going to do that? And then just the piece of being innovative, like brainstorming with your team or by yourself to just spice things up when you take them virtual and just make them more interesting. And then the last piece is really related just to teams in general, like fire drills. That's something that any enablement professional knows. So me and my team, we always try to focus 80% on our quarterly objectives and key results, like really staying on track here. 15%, we're always firefighting, meaning that's the unexpected stuff that comes our way that we have to deal with. And then 5% just goes in the void, right? God knows what happened with those 5%. And what's happening now, what we have seen, that we had to be flexible around that, and we had to increase that percentage, and say, hey, we need 30% or 25% really to focus on firefighting, just because there's so many things that all of a sudden are coming our way.
So I really appreciate these challenges. I think, there is this whole challenge of connection with people working virtually, and the same thing occurs with, with our customers and with our clients. This whole notion of going virtual and what that really means, and the idea of kind of Zoom fatigue, so really making sure that things are chunked out and really kind of segregated, is interesting. We, our business at Sales Readiness Group is really built around training initiatives, and there were so many training initiatives that had face-to-face components to them. We think, that instructor-led training in person is a great thing, but it wasn't practical. So we've had to kind of think out of the box and really work with our clients on ways to virtualize and do on-demand training and use Zoom to address some of those challenges, even on a global basis. I mean, we're seeing, just like this webinar, and the number of fire drills that comes up is increasing. So let's talk a little bit about how we're going to respond to these challenges. I know you have some really great thoughts on that.
Yep. Nice. Okay, so on the connection front, again, I give you things that we've also been implementing. So I can speak from experience that those have been working really well. If you don't already have monthly sales calls set up, again, to bring people together and connect them, that's the very first thing I'm going to recommend here. If you had a sales kickoff this year, or an SKO, how we would call it, this is a great time to bring that topic back. I'm sure folks were very excited to get together early in the year. We at Seismic were lucky enough to be able to do that still in person. And we use that call to just bring that excitement back from that meeting. So we're making sure that theme and that topic is staying alive. We also use those calls to highlight a lot of wins. Like, this is not about giving, here's how you're going to use the latest Salesforce update. This is about making sure you're sharing wins and you get people excited. And again, you drive that team spirit, right? Also, if you have folks that were doing really well in training, they've been implemented some of the new skills, like that's the point in time to highlight those guys. The second piece that we've done that I loved, and my team has done an amazing job to roll that out, is a win from home competition, where we measured certain activities around supporting our prospects and customers. And we had different teams set up, and we had a really great prize for the winning team, really something to look forward to post-crisis. That has been driving just a lot of that interaction. And then obviously any extra spiff and incentives, we know sellers always love that. Now is a really good time to do that. In regards to mixing up your happy hours, just try to do a lunch or try to do a breakfast. Like, pick different times in the day when people has less fatigue, is usually a recommendation that I would give here. On the virtual training front, so a few things how you can make this whole thing a little bit more interesting for people. So we give pre-work and post-work, so we make sure the whole thing stays alive after they leave the training. We do a lot in breakouts, project work, team interaction, and that really helps us with that Zoom fatigue that I mentioned, because people know they come in on training to work, not to listen for, you know, a couple of hours. And then the last piece is really, you know, as I mentioned, the fire drill. So we had to change the cadence of how we work as an enablement team. So we're meeting on Mondays and Wednesdays for a half hour just to sync and make sure we're all aligned. We have a 1 hour team meeting on Fridays where we're really making sure we're structured for the week and we're able to deal with those fire drills that I mentioned. And we have a weekly plan on a page that's aligned to our objectives. So knowing what we have to do each week with an owner and due dates has really helped us to stay on track and be able to, you know, fight some of these situations that come up. And then we're also using a half-day enablement work block. Like that's time blocked in calendar where we know, hey, fire drills happen. That's our time to get together to deal with those. And the last piece is just a leadership and executive check-in to make sure, hey, did anything else happen that we didn't know about that we have to tackle in the coming weeks? So those are, again, some of the things that have been working very well for us.
No, I think these are some really concrete suggestions. A couple that come to mind, for example, just this team check-in. You know, at SRG, Sales Readiness Group, we do a check-in every morning now at 9:45. It's 15-minute stand-up meeting, but it gets everyone connected. Everyone can kind of see themselves on Zoom. You know, we're doing a once-a-month virtual lunch. We're starting to do some of those types of activities with our clients, really chunking out that learning. I think this idea of the pre and post work is really good. And, you know, just some great concrete suggestions. So I want to go to our next topic, which is the importance of sales enablement as we emerge from this crisis. So I just wrote a blog post about a week ago, you know, preparing for the rebound, kind of used a little bit of a basketball theme there, but you know, we are going to emerge from this crisis, and it's not likely to be kind of day and night, but it's going to be a new normal. We see people now going out in public with masks. I went to a doctor's appointment yesterday. Just they do a temperature check on your way in. They have 6 feet of spacing between people. So the world has changed. And, you know, as we think about sales enablement, we have to start thinking, okay, how are we going to kind of prepare our teams for the new normal? And I want to, again, pull in our participants and just get your thoughts. You know, so what are you doing now to prepare your sales teams? Again, if you'd use a chatbot, just like we did at the beginning when Alonzo was, love to hear just some thoughts as to what you're doing to prepare sales teams. And Irina at Seismic, what are some of the things you're working on in terms of preparing your team?
Yeah, you know what? I think the preparation is an interesting word. Like a lot of the things that are happening now might go on for a fairly long period of time, right? So I think the key word for me here is mindset. You know, we can give them all the skills and we can give them all the tools, but in the end, it comes down to how do we feel about this new situation? How is this impacting our approach? How we're showing up just in the marketplace, right? The extra support that we're giving our prospects and customers, in the end, like we should be, you know, consultants, we should be supportive. Like there's a lot of things that we have to take care of. And I think, again, that comes down to the mindset again. So you're not a seller, you have become so much more.
So I'm seeing some really great interaction here, communicating video chat and software to make that personal connection, asking our sales teams what they learned from this time and what they're going to do going forward. So how can we apply what we're going to learn? Monthly review of tactics and best practices, so some refreshing, more training and support. I know that SRG, we've implemented some more internal training. We're seeing a lot of our clients implementing some learning initiatives to really just retool their team. Company-wide Fabulous Friday sales update. I love that, celebrating some of the wins. So we're seeing some really great ideas. Again, thank you so much for participating. And I want to kind of just provide a little bit of framework. Keep the ideas coming. We'll try and come back to them. So feel free to participate at any time. Again, we won't be able to share every idea, but we love seeing the participation and the thoughts. So I want to share a framework about rebuilding the sales pipeline. So a lot of time right now has really been spent on requalifying existing opportunities, looking at the existing sales pipeline, what's moving forward, what's stalled, what are some of the next steps. But ultimately, we're going to have to rebuild the sales pipeline. We look at that initial poll that we ran, with 42% of the companies having revenues off 25% or more, there's just not going to be enough existing business carrying from Q1 when this all started into Q2. So we have to think about whose ideal client profile. Maybe that's changed a little bit. I know we had an internal discussion yesterday. Which industries are doing reasonably well? Where is there more openness? We're seeing a lot of opportunity within tech right now. What's the purchase process? Is there going to be increased scrutiny over purchases? Almost for sure. You know, what are the geographies? One of our clients made a really interesting point that in the virtual world, the geography becomes a lot less relevant. We can reach out to almost anyone, almost anywhere if we're conducting Zoom sales calls. What are the buyer demographics? Who are we really going after? What's the buying authority and the budget? And then one that I think is really important is what's the likelihood of engaging? Some people are going to be a lot easier to engage with than others, and it's going to be probably a lot more difficult to sell up within the organizations. How are we going to get referrals? How are we going to map those organizations? How are we going to really expand our footprint? And so I think the first thing is really just thinking about, you know, who are the clients? What are the demographics? How are we going to engage with them? And then equally important, maybe even more important, is how well is our solution aligning? Does our solution really address the business need? Has that business need changed? Are there newer ways or ways to innovate and improve solution? Again, in our industry, it's a lot about moving things from what were traditionally classroom-based to virtual or on-demand. As Irina mentioned, you know, pre-work, post-work, chunking that out. Are there value-added services we can offer? We have to make sure that we're adding value. And then I think we're really tying in very closely to the work that the sales enablement leaders are doing is, are we able to leverage content to enhance relationships? So we've increased, for example, the frequency of our webinars. We've increased our blogging. We've come up with things that are very specific to certain industries. Again, it's about relationships first right now and adding value. And Irina, I'd love to get your perspective on this and just kind of your thoughts from a sales enablement perspective. Irina, I think, okay.
Absolutely, Norman. So really taking a couple of steps back here, like one of the things that I love to talk about is just, you know, the value that our sellers nowadays can offer through storytelling, right? And that's throughout really the entire sales process, impacting all the different stages of the pipeline that a prospect might be in. And really taking a couple of steps back here, like we see that the whole the B2B world is heavily impacted by what's happening in the B2C world as well, right? If we look at companies like, you know, the Amazons, where people go search for product, they look at different options, they read recommendations, they watch customer videos, like there's so much to see that now impacts the B2B world. And the second piece is the whole landscape is also just becoming more competitive, right? And we see it even now, everybody is online and does virtual selling, you know, and that really means that sellers have just an increased need to differentiate themselves in sometimes very highly competitive markets, right? And they expect that they have what they need to have in regards to content and stories that they want to tell to prospects at the right point in time at their fingertips, right? Being on their smartphone, on their tablet, or whatever that is. So something that I like to talk about is just here when we go in and we speak with, you know, CMOs and we speak with CROs as well, like a question that we love to ask is, hey, do you actually know what stories are working really well for your organization? And the funny thing is often they don't have good data in terms of what content and stories are being used by the sellers, how it's being used and how effective it is. And then similarly, when we're talking to CROs and we ask them, hey, are your sellers actually telling the right stories? And again, in a time like this, it's even more important than it has ever been. Often they don't know for sure what stories are being told, and they don't know whether or not their teams are on message, or whether or not they are saying, you know, what is actually truly resonating with the buyer, right? Coming back to your point. So if you move on to the next slide real quick. So
I will, and I just would reiterate, I think that you're making such a valid point here that the messaging has to be relevant. And I think that's a question, whether it's the CMOs or the CROs, are we, you know, in terms of, particularly as we emerge from the crisis, the messaging has to shift, and it's really, do we have everyone kind of on the right playbook, using the right messaging that's relevant to clients? And I saw these stats on your website, and we talked about them a little bit before, but if you could just kind of enlighten us a little bit. I thought this was just, you know, really, really got to the heart of relevancy.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of linking back to that, and I always find that stat probably the most shocking every time I'm seeing it. So we know that almost 60% of the sellers, that's the time that they actually not selling, right? And the question is, what are they doing when they're not selling? And usually is that they searching for content and for good stories to tell. They are building content, right? How often have we seen that people are using like decks that were thrown together from all different sorts of places, or are they making up their own messaging? And really the key here is, like I mentioned, to have them, or to make sure that they have the right content at the right time at their fingertips. You can significantly decrease that percentage, right? So that's a huge deal. The 70%, like I'm just using like an example, how many times have we heard that sellers would say, give us more case studies to the marketing team, right? That's probably like the common one. And then marketing goes, we've already given you 3. Have you actually used them? Like, what are you doing with all the content we're building? We're putting all this money into. And, usually this is happening because marketing teams don't have the insight into how content is doing and how it's being used and how it's externally engaged with, right? So it's especially during a time like this with COVID, it's so important to know, how's your content actually doing out there? Are you investing in the right things? Are people interested in what your marketing team is putting together?
So I have a question that's come up in that chat. There was a little bit of confusion over the CMO and CRO, and CMO is obviously the Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Revenue Officer.
I just answered it as well.
But I did want to get to Maria's point. There was a question about storytelling. So I always think, from my framework, we often talk about content. I'm not sure everyone's really familiar with the linkage between content and story. Can you just share that a little bit with us, what you mean by stories?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if we look at a piece of content, ultimately this enables our sellers to tell a story, right? That might be relevant to me as a buyer. And there's, when somebody approaches me with a story I'm not interested in that is presented in a piece of content, there's really nothing worse than that, because I'm not going to look at it probably. So it's really about not just putting out stale content, but activating that content so that your sellers are able to tell a compelling story through that content. That's really what the whole concept here is when I talk about storytelling.
And I'll give an example of that. If we're talking to a potential prospect or someone that's in the pipeline, we're talking about a shifting of a company, how we're shifting from instructor-led training to virtual instructor-led training, or some combination of on-demand and virtual instructor-led training. Simply going through that fact pattern is not as interesting as sharing a story about maybe another client that we did it with, what it looked like before, what it looked like after. So the storytelling is really what brings the content to life in terms of relevancy, and also just makes it a little bit more interesting, and that's a lot more relatable than just facts and figures. So if you can kind of take those facts and figures and put it into something that's relatable, it becomes a lot more memorable and has a bigger impact from a selling standpoint. I want to jump to our third topic, buyer-centric sales enablement approach. So we often think about, I'm going to use a model that we use and then ask Irina to kind of expand on this model. But why is this so important for revenue growth? And this is something we call the process alignment model. And if you think about the bottom, I'm a seller. Maybe it's virtual. I'm going to plan for a call. So I always want to have call objectives. I'm going to ask some questions to really better understand the needs, use my active listening skills. I'm going across the bottom of this chart here. I'm going to, based on what the customer is saying, I'm going to kind of share value and present a solution that's really relevant. Then if they have any questions or feedback, I'm going to manage that feedback. I'm going to build on any positive feedback. If they have some objections, I'm going to really kind of clarify and respond to those objections. And eventually, I'm going to ask for commitment. So really nice, simple sales process. But it doesn't accomplish a lot if it doesn't map with the top, which is a person really open to hearing what I have to say? Questions that really help them focus on their priorities. And by providing them with content and knowledge they need to make a great solution. Am I helping them evaluate their options? And a big option today is status quo. And ultimately, am I helping them make the right decision? And so use and understand, particularly in this pandemic world that we're in right now, that this sale process isn't linear. as people evaluate their options, they may take a step back or even a couple of steps back and reevaluate their priorities or want to get more information. And so I think a lot of times salespeople are challenged. They're off here waiting for commitment. They may be telling their sales manager, the customer went quiet on me, because they're no longer in alignment. So what we want to think about, and I think it's really foundational today, it always has been, but maybe more important today, is this idea of using the alignment to create value and build very strong relationships. And so with that, I'm going to kind of pose the following question to our participants. Again, really appreciate all the engagement. We're seeing a very active chat pod here. Where are deals getting stalled? And I'm just going to go back one slide. You can just kind of type in the phase where deals are getting stalled or your own ideas. But Irina, I'm interested, where are you seeing deals getting stalled right now with your clients and your customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, obviously I'm connecting with a lot of peers in the field as well to get an idea what's happening out there. I think particularly when we're looking at if I'm using your sales process here as an example, like stage 3 and 4 all the way to stage 5, like normally if things have already kicked off, I think, a lot of folks out there are currently faced with just frozen budget, just to see how the next quarter is going to play out, right? So I would probably towards the end of the sales process. I think if things were already close to the finish line, hopefully a lot of us are able to bring this over the finish line.
Yeah.
But just from general observation and speaking with a lot of peers and reps out there.
And I think that's very consistent with what we're saying. So, one of those is, I think it's Cassandra's putting in here, our consumers have time to hear what we have to offer. So people are open to listening, but they're waiting to spend money until the economy improves. Decision making, they're scared to make long-term changes, gaining commitment, saying a lot of them about decision making. I'm saying the purchase process have changed after this pandemic. I agree with that. It's probably slower in most cases. And I think that we're seeing a lot of challenges. I know even internally, we have a lot of things that we're working on that we're very close to being, completed, that are at least being on hold. Customers are preserving cash and delaying purchases. Decisions are slowed. Focus is a problem. People are having problem really focusing on the priorities. So again, we're seeing a lot of the challenges, and they're not necessarily so much early in the sales process, but as we get to the middle and end of the sales process. So buyers are increasingly feeling poorly served. And I think this is a really important point because it gets to what can we do in this environment. And Irina, I know you have some thoughts on this, and you pulled a couple of stats for us, but I'd love you to expand on that if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this really goes back to, and somebody just put this in the chat as well, like sellers don't know what to do, like things get stalled and everybody's like, okay, what are next steps? Clearly I can't have another sales discussion because I don't want to buy it right now. So now what? So for me, here comes the whole concept of having the right content at the right point in time and having the right stories to tell just to keep people engaged as they move through this phase. That's a really important point here. So when we're looking at the actual buyer experience, right? And you were just talking about this a little bit versus us selling our product or our services. I find just these two steps super interesting. So we see that nearly 85% of the buyers say that the experience is as important as the product and the services themselves. That said, only a quarter feel like their last buyer experience was actually a positive one. And, now with deals being stalled and these periods, that's part of the buyer experience. How you're handling that. Are you going to go out being pushy? Are we dealing with the situation in a sensitive way? Are we supporting them? Are we providing extra value that, again, might help us build that relationship? Those are all different examples that come into play here. And, when I look at this, like just taking an example, like unrelated to my professional world as well, service really does matter. And I see this, I go shopping at this small particular store who sells cosmetics in New York City, like stuff that I could buy in any other store in New York. And it cost me 20% more to buy it there. But what I'm getting is people that I know, people that are lovely, people that give me tremendous advice on what to buy. And sometimes I get a lot of free stuff as well. So I'm happy to pay 20% more, right? So just taking it out of the business concept, I think often the experience is really what people, or what pulls people towards making a decision. And I see this as well when, I pick new vendors, like, that is so important, because if you have to work with somebody afterwards for the years to come and you just didn't have a good experience with a rep going through the sales process, is you already think, what's to come here for me if I move forward with this, right? So I think this, even now, this is just gaining.
And I think one of the points you were making, we were kind of chatting a little bit before we started the webinar, is that this has really changed. It used to be like 100% true in the consumer world, and you gave a great consumer example. And I could think about people who would drive a few miles extra to go to a grocery store because they really like the service there, or they'd walk past one coffee shop and they go to the other one because they had a relationship with the person. But it's now finding its way into the B2B world. And as we're connecting with people with Zoom, business is increasingly taking on a more personal nature. People expect to ask them how they're doing, how's their family doing. So this idea of creating a better experience and better relationships is really important, just for having a better conversation, but it actually also leads to a lot better results. I know you pulled some stats for us, and I think these stats are pretty compelling.
Right, that resonates. Good. So, again, it's the whole piece around, we actually know, and this is McKinsey data that you're looking at here, that companies that deliver better buyer experience also achieve stronger results. So that goes all the way from, increased win rates, 20 up to 40%, which is obviously significant. And then generally faster revenue growth of up to 10%. And then, greater shareholder returns here as well over baseline. So, and again, this is not stuff that we have just pulled, that comes from McKinsey. So, I think this is just additional data to really validate the point how important experience generally is, and now even has become in this.
I think, when I think about with the situation we're in today, just that idea of having 20 to 40% higher win rates and being able to move things a little bit faster. I mean, those were two of the compelling things we saw at the beginning of the section, in that win rates are down because decisions are being delayed. So just connecting with people, again, we may not be able to totally influence how fast they spend money or what their budgeting process is, but we can definitely increase their affinity by getting the right content in front of them and really using that to add value and build relationships. So we want our sales teams to have the right conversations. So how are we going to guide our sales teams to have the right conversations at the right time? And again, I'm going to pull in our participants, have another chat. So what's changed in the sales conversations? And Irina, as we're waiting for people to kind of share some of their thoughts with us, what do you think's changed in the sales conversation?
I think, again, quite a bit. Just considering the situation that people are in, not professionally, like organizations in general, but that people are also in on the home front, right? Everybody being in these type setups. I think just the sensitivity in general and the need for EQ versus IQ in sales conversations has even become more important, because in the end, sales is a human contact sport. I've always been saying that, and now this is becoming even more relevant.
Right. I'm looking here at just some of the input we're getting. I'm seeing empathy come up a couple of times. I think personal relationships come up a few times. They're going so fast. More consultative selling, getting up higher within the organizations. Again, I'm seeing more things around empathy and personal relationships. And I think that's exactly right. I'm seeing, EQ as being very important in terms of emotional intelligence, really being sensitive. And I'll give you just a couple of thoughts that we've put together. So for our customers, one is increase the frequency of touch points. In an environment where you're not able to meet with people in person, reaching out more often, start to know what your customer is thinking or feeling. So really asking questions, really making sure you're taking time to actively listen. Make sure you're creating value without the expectation of immediate business. Quite often the people you're speaking with may not be able to control timing. They may not have control over budgets, but you want them to be an advocate. Start working with them and collaborating as you're building that trust. What's the shared plan for getting a deal done? So what do you think would take to get this done in Q3? I know you can't make any commitments per se, but if we were going to move this initiative forward, know it's stalled, you've kind of told me it's still really important in your business, what can we do together to kind of work on this? Maybe we consider a pilot. Maybe we do an initial offering. Maybe we think about a demo. And then I do think, and this is expanding our influence within the account, who else in your organization might be interested? Is there any other people we should be contacting with? And, Irina, you sent a really interesting model. I think it was called the Sales Enablement Soft Skill Triangle. And I'm going to bring it up here and ask you to just kind of share this with our participants and what these three roles are.
Yeah, so we were just talking about, more EQ for sellers, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the same for people like myself, right? And not just sales enablement, like speaking enablement in general. If you're doing revenue enablement, go-to-market enablement like myself. I think this is same thing for if you're in learning and development, professional development, like really any type role where you're contributing to the success of be it the sales organization or the go-to-market suite. So I've been using this a lot throughout my career, especially hiring in the enablement field is really tough because there's not that many enablement folks out there. They have been doing it for a long time. So sometimes we have to screen for different competencies when we bring people on the team. And the three things for me here that now even more than ever just matter so much are really to be an effective communicator, an inspiring connector, and a strong influencer. So I'm going to very lightly hit on those three. So in regards to being an effective communicator, you can build the most innovative enablement services and come up with never heard ideas and amazing initiatives. But unless you're able to communicate this to the rest of your organization and talk about the what, the why, the how behind all of that, it's just not going to get you very far, right? Especially now we might be driving a lot of change. We come up with out of the box new projects that we're driving. Like if we're not able to properly talk about this, it's just not going to be worth as much. So that's a really important skill, especially as we're driving, so much change just as an organization. And then talking about being a strong influencer. So you have to gain a lot of buy-in from stakeholders and from people in the field, right? Especially when you put out new things. And, also with the enablement field, still being relatively new, maybe partly undiscovered as well. Any professional has to be really creative and just try out new things out of the box. And that really means that influencing skills heavily come into play here because we have to make sure that people buy into what we do. And then the last piece is, that's the most important one for me, is just being able to be a connector, right? So if you ever want to move away from enablement being a program or a function with a beginning and an end, and ultimately strive to create a customer-centric ecosystem in your organization where you have information, feedback, and content freely flowing between business units, you have to connect people with each other. You need to have the ability to build bridges and also make sure that people that might not have the same goals and objectives get on the same page so you can create open feedback channel and also sometimes manage some of that friction, right? So all of that, bringing these three pieces together, like that's really the EQ piece of the job for anybody who's in a role like that. IQ matters, but EQ is just something really.
I think that's really important because when you think about that sales enablement function, you have to have your senior leadership on board. You have to have strong sales and marketing alignment. You have to have the technology in place. There's so many pieces that have to come together. So you do have to be able to connect people. You have to have strong influence in the organization, and the communication is critical. So I loved this model when I saw it, and I appreciate your taking the time and to share it. I want to touch on one additional really key point, which is the role of the frontline sales managers, because how are we going to leverage our sales managers? And we look at this model, and it's a model I think we've shared before, but we look at the sales manager's role in enablement. So we talked a little bit about sales process, talked about training, talked about coaching, the technology and tools. Just from an implementation standpoint, ultimately, the sales force reports up to sales managers who in a large organization may report up to sales executives. But they touch all these functions. And I wanted to just kind of, we've talked a lot because we're in the training and coaching business at Sales Readiness Group. We also, as part of that, touch heavily on sales process. But Irina, I wanted to kind of get your perspective on the one area that we're seeing a huge interest in, particularly as companies are leveraging technology a little bit your perspective on the sales manager's role as it relates to technology and tools.
Yeah, so I think specifically, the topic of adoption always comes up a lot when I'm chatting with peers. And the key is, if we put the money into technology, we want to see ROI, right? And making sure that we have strong adoption is obviously extremely helpful. So it totally depends on the tool or the solution, obviously, that you're implementing. But my general point here is, it's very helpful if you set like KPIs out of the gates, like specifically if you want to see certain behaviors, or people, do or add certain things to a tool or to a system, or if you're having an e-learning tool, you want to look at lesson completion or whatever that might be, and make some of those hard KPIs as well that you have the managers drive, right? And I would shop technology when I know there is a real need, not, hey, we're bringing something in just to give people more admin work to do. Like, that's not the point. We want to make sure we make people's lives easier. That's the whole goal here. So, in those type scenarios, I think bringing managers in to drive that, just really the key word here is accountability.
Yeah,
is key.
That's great. And what I would add to that is there's typically an adoption curve. And so initially when you start to introduce a new technology, and again, there has to be a really good business purpose, but the salespeople are smart. They're going to say, what's in it for me? So for a long period of time, many organizations struggle with Salesforce adoption because a lot of it is really a management tool. But ultimately, they had to kind of use a little bit more stick than carrot there and say, hey, if it's not in Salesforce, we really don't recognize it. And people generally have adopted Salesforce. But in other sales enablement technologies, there's so much in it for the salespeople themselves in terms of being able to better connect. And so there's this adoption curve where initially it will take more time, but when you look at the long-term benefits, so I love the idea of building that into the KPIs. Quick interaction, we'll kind of do this as we're moving because we want to stay on track here, but just curious, we've got a really broad global audience, a lot of sales enablement professionals. Curious question, how are your managers supporting sales enablement? So I'm going to let you kind of respond to that chat, and I'm going to just kind of share a few thoughts while we're getting some response, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. But when I mentioned the Rebound, I mentioned that I'd drafted a blog post on it. But some of the key things is, remember, your team can't rebound alone. You've really got to enable your managers. So defining the roles and expectations, making sure managers have simple tools to train and to coach. And probably the biggest single area we're seeing for managers right now is those managers becoming better coaches. And that means opportunity coaching. What could they do to help their salespeople re-qualify and strategize around deals? And also skills coaching. How can they help their salespeople become better in terms of more proficient and some of the skills they need to develop in new ways to connect? Make sure the managers have checkpoints in onboarding. Many organizations are starting to add people. How are they going to onboard new people? Make sure that managers have a lot of responsibilities. How are we going to really make sure that we don't have them too tied up in administrative work and focusing on virtual coaching? So those are just some of the ideas to really enable your managers. And I want to come back to our chat for a minute because we're seeing some great responses. Make sure it's interactive and helpful. Maybe use the resources available to them. They can't do it alone. So I'm saying the managers have to get closer. They have to really, get closer to their teams. We suggested daily check-ins. Irina, some of your thoughts on this topic?
If you ask me personally, how the managers at Seismic support the enablement team, we're really lucky. So, I'm in a very special situation that I'm running enablement at the largest enablement company out there. So if our managers wouldn't be supportive of what we do, then I probably wouldn't be here. So our teams are awesome. Just the involvement and the help and the support that they provide to us. I'm not saying it's always easy, but if you're asking about generally how they backing us, like, we're pretty outstanding organization. I've been very, very lucky, and so has been my team.
That's great. I think, it's just really important that we include the sales managers, we provide them with the tools, the skills, and really focus on building better managers. So I want to kind of share a few key takeaways, and I'll turn it back to Alonso in a minute. So first of all, a big thank you to Irina for joining us today, and for all of you for taking the time. So to recap, the coronavirus poses significant challenges. We talked about some of those challenges. Sales enablement can help address the challenges. Irina went through 3 specific challenges and how to respond to those challenges as we emerge from the crisis. Delivering the right content at the right time kind of goes back to that sales enablement society definition. That's what sales enablement is about. And I would just expand to really tell the right stories. You want salespeople to have the right skills, want them to have emotional intelligence so they can better connect, want them to use the right content to really make it relevant. Sales conversations need to reflect the new reality. We saw from our own audience today that 40+% have sales that are off over 25%. We really have to understand what's going on with our customers. And it's not just about their businesses, it's about their personal lives. We have to kind of shift our conversation, show a lot of empathy, developing those relationships. We saw some stats about the benefit of having a better experience. And our sales managers play a crucial role in supporting sales enablement initiatives. They're closest to the sales team. So really just some great content, great insights from Irina. And Alonso, with that, I'm going to turn it back to you to kind of wrap up and help us conclude. And again, thank Irina and thank all of our participants.
Thank you, Norman. And thank you, Irina. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Oh, okay, thank you. If anybody has any questions, I didn't see many come up on the Q&A. Looks like everybody was just participating on the chat, and that's fine. Feel free to reach any of us at info@salesreadinessgroup.com or seismic.com/contact. I also highly encourage you to take advantage of all the complementary resources on both of our sites. They're both very resourceful sites, so take advantage of them. And so with that, we are now going to let you know that before we wrap up, there's going to be a short survey that will show up when I close the webinar. And I would highly appreciate any feedback you may have for us as we work on improving this webinar series. And with that, Irina, thank you so much for being here with us today. Norman, as always, it's a pleasure to do these events with you. And hey, thank you everyone for the participation today. I am really excited to see so much conversations going on in these webinars, and it's all because of you.
I really have to say this was very special. Thanks to everybody. This is I've been interacting a bit in the chat with all of you. This was really wonderful. Like, keep doing that when you go on webinars. It's really really great for panelists.
I love it, Irina. We're starting a movement here. Okay, so that's it. Enjoy your days or wherever you are, maybe the afternoon. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. Any final words, Norman?
Alonso, thank you for hosting. Irina, thank you for joining and really sharing all the great content. Thank you, everyone, as Alonso said, for being so generous and taking the time to participate. And have a great afternoon and rest of your day.